Welcome to Peter's podcast, where we talk about real yoga, actual happiness, and deep living. Thanks for joining me. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Peter.
So I wanted to talk about some of the things that have been on my mind today. Personal issues, political problems, national issues, global issues, climate issues, relationship issues, dog care, where are we going to go on vacation,
The summer.
how do we get to the city on time to teach,
Weeds in the garden.
and what weeds should we keep and what weeds should we pull out,
It's a lot.
and where are we going and what are we doing and which way is up.
Oh, I hear you. That's the best I can do to start off.
And then I even got sick this week, which I don't usually do.
Ho, ho, ho.
And I have suspicion that part of the reason that physical expression came about is overwhelm.
The big O.
The big O, overwhelm. But anyway, lucky for us, we have this whole toolbox right here.
Yes, I like the toolbox.
Starts with Y and ends with A. It has Og in the middle.
It's the Og that gets you.
Yeah. And in a way, I was thinking about Ted Lasso before we got on the air because, besides being really fun to watch, the Ted Lasso show on Apple TV is also sprinkled with a lot of really interesting advice and a lot of, commentary on the nature of all those things, relationships, circumstances, winning and losing.
Yeah. And the commentary is like pithy, but very succinct and funny. And I think those things really help when overwhelm is present.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know that we have to go into what is overwhelm very much. I think everybody's pretty...
can tap into their own sense of overwhelm. I agree.
Yeah. So maybe we'll just go with the reference that you just made on it's the Og that gets you, right? In Ted Lasso, there was this one episode that was about hoping to make it through. I forget whether it was through that game or through that streak or into going from the lower league to the upper league or whatever. But
the relegation and the getting back.
Yeah. But there was this mention of hope, and all the Brits, for those of you who don't know about Ted Lasso, it's an American football coach who gets hired to coach English soccer football team. And is hired because they want him to fail, but he ends up bringing his own sort of magic to the team. So anyway, he's really opposed to this statement that the Brits have, that it's the hope that kills you.
So what's your take on that in this moment of overwhelm? Overwhelm, yeah.
Well, it's hope, I think, is one of those things that is, it didn't come out of Pandora's box as like
maybe
the ultimate,
one of the
ultimate thing that escaped. Anyway, I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sounds potentially right.
Yeah,
we'll go back and read it.
But the idea of hope, it's like expecting change, and it's one thing to be hopeful or optimistic or like expect that you have what it takes to come out of it. I talked a little bit about Ganesha at the end of our regrounding in meditation class the other day, we do this mantra to Ganesha, who is like the remover of obstacles. And I think often we think of that in like a genie way, like, oh, good, get rid of all my problems for me, please, Ganesha, Jai. And, I think that while that is a potential outcome, depending on, your practice and whatnot, also it's calling on your own resourcefulness and willingness to stick with something until you get through the obstacle.
Yeah.
So it's just as much that as the other.
So one thing that I really hear in this is the sort of, it's maybe not the hope that kills you or that gets you, but it's the expectation around how it's going to change, and then like being kind of dashed on the rocks of that expectation not manifesting the way that you wanted to. And there's that sort of like, I don't know, I feel like life is very push and pull, and the pull is like the thing that you think that you're going to get because of the work that you're doing. And, I don't know, I feel like there's some ways to get around that, but they're not so apparent, generally speaking. And like, when there's one too many things that you're hoping for these outcomes around, like, I don't know, you mentioned so many different sort of layers or echelons of hope and expectations around things getting to be better or getting to be okay, or how you, I don't know, it's almost like we cannot help ourselves. We will be thinking about these solutions to these problems. Right. We will do that. I feel like that's the big acceptance piece that we all just kind of collectively have to get to, that there's a lot in process and change and flux, and it's really not up to like any of us individually. And the more that we can like be in that place that you're talking about, that isn't attaching, it's like, how can we imagine that change will happen potentially along the lines of what we're working towards, but also kind of like not get stuck in these like sort of micromanaging places of like, this is what I think should happen, because honestly, I think we're out of our depth here.
Yeah. Well, it's, there is that yoga phrase from the sutras, which, by the way, you're doing a training. I know.
I was gonna say it out loud, but yes.
Abhyasa vairagyam, to practice without an attachment to the result. Like the attachment to a result is what gets in the way of your practice being productive, right? Because then you're going somewhere instead of being where you are.
Right. That's
you're
the
already ahead. Yeah. Trying to shake the table.
Shaking. Sorry. I thought you were holding my hand.
I know we have this interesting setup where we're actually right next to each other. Yeah. So there's that, this hope that will kill you. So there is an element of overwhelm recovery that is about a hopefulness or an awareness. And you said this the other day when we were talking to someone, that like, if you can step out of the immediate moment for a second and say, I know this is going to change. I know that we will pass through this. That's the kind of hopefulness that I think is really useful, which of course Ted Lasso said. Right?
Did I say that to you?
I think he said it to me and this other Peter that we know. So there's that, like it's not even optimism. It's a willingness to allow that this too shall pass, if you want to use biblical language, or, it's like, that things will change because things are always changing. So part of overwhelm is just to say, the Scarlett O'Hara line, I'll think about that tomorrow. Tomorrow is another day.
Yeah. Can I just bring in one like little sort of macro thing, which is that, like one of the definitions of Tantra that we use is to expand beyond the like kind of limited piece of pattern work that we're involved in, so that we get this like bigger space to experience within. But then we have to remember that we come back into our limited experience, which is highly subjective, and that this, stepping outside of or expanding outside of, it's a very particular state that you have to get into, which in our world we kind of imagine we get into by meditating. I can't talk anymore. But then, we bring it back in as new insights, new ways of seeing what's happening in this like changeable, limited, subjective place that we're in. So like that Tantra definition, like by definition, really, we're like doing what you're talking about, like getting that we're on the page. I'm kind of totally enmeshed in my workshop that's coming up on Sunday, which is about Samadhipada, which kind of sets that up, right? Like if we understand that we're like living this life in this subjective way, but that there's always this potential for change that we can get on board with, then we come back to dealing with these messes that we've created, I think, individually and collectively. It's really not so easy to kind of have these, have a sense of how to proceed sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Anyway,
I totally do.
Just wanted to bring in that definition of Tantra that I think a lot of us, may be working with, and something about the way that you said it just now kind of hit that point for me, that what does it feel like when we step outside of for a moment to kind of reignite a presence,
right?
With what's happening here, with what is.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to, we listen to this other podcast now and then, and it's almost funny because he's so toward the like, well, okay, so what can I do in order to do that? Right. So just to bring a tiny bit of that in, to get to a place where you can have that other frame of mind that we started calling hope, but now we're just calling an expansion. One of the ways is to simply create a change, like to shift energy, which could mean doing something different, right? And especially doing something different if you're in a pattern. Like if your pattern is, I always have to get worried and try to do more in order to fix it, could you instead take a walk, go to the museum?
Oh, are you talking to me?
Do something else, like shift the energy quite literally, take in different information. Obviously, like the yoga practice is a whole technology for that. So doing your yoga practice is a way. Go on.
Oh, I just had this thought right there that, there's something about being willing to acknowledge that what works for one person may not work for another person.
Totally.
And that there are like really very individual ways into how do I shift energy. And what I think about that is from my own deep exploration of it for myself, is that we have to get really granular in our experience of our own reactivity in our physical body, in our emotional body, in our thoughts, so that we can actually go in there and unwind the wound adaptive patterns that we made already in adapting to things that have happened in the past.
Yeah.
And so, like when I hear like go for a walk to change the energy, like sometimes it's about like saying I'm skipping the part where I realize I need to go for a walk.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like there's
Well, I think there's like a spectrum of it, right? Like there is, um, there's like a range of one's response. So like if you're overwhelmed, right? Maybe coming into like, okay, so where is this pattern that I'm all wound up about is not going to be something accessible in that second, but like taking a walk is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or another thing out of Ted Lasso that, I'm a big fan of was having a mantra, where like the young man Colin, who's got a lot of shame, his mantra was, I am a strong and capable man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes like you need an insert into the thing to shift the energy,
For
and
sure.
then you can take the time to look more carefully. And that's like a svadhyaya process, self-study. And that's a deep process. I mean, I would say that's half of life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can ignore it, but if you want to actually figure anything out, you have to spend a lot of energy understanding your reactions and understanding how to not do the same thing over and over again that makes you overwhelmed or whatever.
Yeah. So I think there might be something in our process together where we kind of come at the same thing from opposite sides, because what happens for me a lot of the times is if I just take a mantra, like let's say off the shelf, let's work with I am a strong and capable man, which of course probably wouldn't be my mantra, but whatever. Like somebody said, that's one of the ones that you can take. And I take that one and I'm like, okay, this isn't working. It's not helping me. And so I have to go back to the drawing board and do this sort of more granular svadhyaya just to come up with the one that works for me, right? One I've been working with lately is everything's going to be fine. Everything's fine. And that kind of came up for me in meditation one day, and it kind of kept coming up for me. And I thought, this feels really, simplistic or something, but it had this energetic quality to it, which was like, you don't have to overthink this. Whatever's happening, you don't have to overthink it. There's a simpler way to be with what's going on. And for me, that came out of my svadhyaya. And then it became a mantra that I tasked myself.
It came out of your meditation.
It came out of my meditation, which for me, in my way of working with myself, is a svadhyaya practice. I am a svadhyaya person. I'm not a tapas person, and I'm not a Ishvara Pranidhana person. I'm primarily a svadhyaya person, and the other things come into support for me. Right. And I teach this in my module 3, which is some sadhana pada, just as the beginning, right? But so I'm sort of imagining that like when we talk about overwhelm or something like it, that we kind of come at it from different ways, and there's ultimately, like the practices that we do and the sort of like idea of what it is we're doing conceptually have to balance each other out. Right? And whether whichever way you come at it,
right,
you have to like acknowledge that just doing practices in an I would say like a rote or automatic or overwhelming way doesn't help anybody.
Right.
But doing the practices is ultimately the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I agree with what I think your premise is, and I don't think that it's mutually exclusive, because all three components, as you'll get to in sadhanapada, are required, right? There must be tapas, there must be the willingness to do the work. Right. There must be understanding something about how this is working on you, or what are you who are you?
Yeah.
And what is it that you need? How are you going to grow, etc.? And then there is an element of letting go, which your mantra that you came up with is explicitly about that.
Exactly.
It's going to be okay, right?
I have to let go.
I have to let go of worrying, or I have to let go of it coming out a certain way, or whatever. All three of those components will be in there. And the mixing of it all is, like baking. You've got to figure out like what makes your cake and do that. And that's the Ishta practice, right? Like, what is it that brings you to a clearer seeing, and that clearer seeing makes it easier for you to do the work. It makes it easier because the work is hard, right? So you know that why you're doing it. Absolutely. And so you're willing. That makes it easier to self-study because you have clearer vision now.
Yeah.
And it makes it easier to let go because you understand more the nature of things.
Exactly.
So all of that stuff goes together. And I think
and that conceptual place is that clear seeing, which is the stepping out place, which we don't really know how to do and can be misconstrued for, an override or like a dissociation.
Yeah, that's a really important point that can never be repeated enough. We're not talking about ignoring stuff.
Because that in the next breath, you're going to have to come in and into the subjective, difficult og, right? Mm-hmm. Of YOGA, and be in the battlefield, But then the enthusiasm and the hope, I think, starts to come from remembering that, I've done this like a lot. I'm starting to get good at stepping out and seeing where am I, and then knowing that I can come back in a new way, even in one conversation,
Yeah, and it's when you get that little bit of perspective too. It's not only this kind of woo-woo philosophical whatnot. It's like practical nuts and bolts. Like, every time I have to take on this task or this job or this project, there's a moment when it's fun, and then there's this moment when it's grueling, and then I think everything's going to fall apart because it's so hard and I'm losing my shit, and then it's done and everybody's applauding.
And there's like this space in between the next thing that I have to do.
And so when you
everybody's applauding,
when you see that, well, I mean, it could literally be that, right? I mean, depending on what kind of a project it is.
Sorry, that got a snort from me.
Like you build a bridge and then you cut the ribbon and everybody applauds, right? So and when you see that over and over again, and if you are being conscious, you start to notice, this happens every time when I get to this overwhelm place, that I'm overwhelmed. But I know I did the groundwork before, and now it's going to be okay. It's just really hard right now. And then when I'm done, it'll be done and everybody will applaud, and that will be great. Right. So
still get to laugh at me. I love it that you, in your like yoga imagination,
everybody applauds at the end. It's like you come out of life and everybody's there. That was a great
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes. I love that part where you were falling down, shit-faced on the ground, and you were like, I just can't go on like this. And then
that was so dramatic.
You got up and you made it. Yeah. So in
my imagination, you just get to eat ice cream and your mom says, good job.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's its own kind of applause.
Yeah.
Cool. There was one other thing that I wanted to say sort of on the practical way, that there are tools of yoga practice that are, more suited to being like on a mat in a room or wherever you do your practice. But then there are other things that you can carry with you for those moments when you are overwhelmed. And another one that showed up in Ted Lasso with a nice cameo was pranayama, right? The psychologist who was helping Ted get over his panic attacks said, just do your 4-7-8 breathing.
Yeah.
So remembering to like use your practice.
Yes.
Tap, even tap, if it's just tap. In a moment.
We have a vagus nerve that comes all the way down and sends information back up to the brain. And like we just really do have tools that we have to use. And you know what? You're right. Sometimes we have to use them in a vacuum just because we're super overwhelmed and we don't have to know why.
Just do it. Hum Sa Kriya. Just watch that breath go up and down a few times. You know, do a 4-7-8 breathing, which if you've never heard that, this is something Andrew Weil popularized. It's breathing in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. We don't do that so often in our Ishta practice, but it's a calming breath. Any breath where you breathe in shorter and breathe out longer could also be helpful.
Breathe out longer,
right. Or alternate nostril breathing is a nice way to pull yourself in.
I find that straw breathing, like that long exhale through the nose and then a little bit through the mouth, it grounds you into your pelvic floor.
Can you describe that? And we'll end with that.
You so you just take a comfortable inhale and you will blow as if you're blowing out through a straw for 8 counts, really nice and slow.
I'm going to do it. Breathe. How long do you breathe in for?
So you just take a comfortable inhale and then purse your lips and blow out as if you're blowing out from a straw for about 8 counts. And at the very last 2 counts, you close your mouth and breathe out through your nose and let the last bits of air come out. And then you just let the breath come back in on its own. And you just can do that, take a couple of breaths to recover. And then if you want, you can do again. It helps us get right back into our root. And then you just let it come right back in.
Thank you, Wendy. I feel ready to go on to my next thing that was going to be overwhelming.
Thanks, Peter.
All right. And your project is so
I'm doing a longer series of the Yoga Sutras. All of the padas were at Samadhi Pada. It's on Sunday from 1 to 5. If by any chance you want to jump in late, please come join us.
By late, you mean you didn't come to the first one? I
mean, you can come, you can pop into any of them, but I mean by late, like you didn't hear about it until now.
Yeah, still possible to sign up. At ishtayoga.com.
At ishtayoga.com.
All right, everybody. Namaste.
Namaste.